In this video, I'll be talking about how overhunting and seed predation affect tropical tree populations. Across the world, tropical forests are losing large vertebrates due to overhunting. This is a problem for the animals themselves, but this is also a problem for the forests in which the animals live. This process of defaunation, or removing animals from ecosystems, is important because it alters plant-animal interactions. Without these animals present, then what are the consequences for the plants? So the question is, what will the tropical forests of the future look like? Now, one way that people have thought about this is if you don't have large frugivorous animals dispersing seeds, then there will be less seed dispersal, and that's a problem for trees because trees want to disperse their seeds as far away as they can to increase the probability of survival. If trees can't disperse their seeds as far, then there'll be less recruitment and there could be lower overall survival due to these distance and density dependent mortality or Jansen-Connell effects. Now, because some of the trees that are dispersed by large vertebrates are larger and have denser wood, there have been predictions that less seed dispersal from overhunting can lead to reduced carbon storage. And so this is one idea of thinking of how tropical forests will be affected by overhunting, by defaunation. However, defaunation affects more than just seed dispersal. So for example, under defaunation, there may be less trampling, which could actually benefit trees by decreasing seedling mortality that way. There are also changes in seed predation. So we've observed cases where you get rid of the large vertebrates through hunting them, and those vertebrates are eating fewer seeds. But we've also seen cases where the small vertebrates that are not hunted increase in population, and then these end up consuming more seeds. And then density dependence is also important to consider because no matter how populations are being changed in the short term, in the long term, if mortality and survival is density dependent, then it may equal out in the long term. And so we have to think about how all of these integrate across the entire life cycle, because we have multiple stages and multiple effects at these different stages, but what we really are interested in is the overall effect on populations. Also, we need to consider life history because depending on the fecundity or seed survival or the adult survival, trees may vary in how they respond to these changes from defaunation. And so I wanted to know, given what we know about defaunation effects and tree life histories, what can we predict about how defaunation will affect tropical forests? Now, to answer this question, I created a model. And in my model, I started by taking data from a few different sources. First, field studies of defaunation effects. So I looked through the literature and especially meta-analyses, and I found ranges of parameter values for these things that I'm going to walk through. So first, how many seeds are dispersed before or after defaunation? How does seedling survival and seed survival differ depending on whether the seed is dispersed or not? How does defaunation affect trampling? How does defaunation change seed predation rates? And what is the strength of density dependence that these trees are experiencing? So the second major source of data are tropical tree population models. So these are data from the Compadre Plant Matrix database. Looking through that, I found 47 species of tropical trees that had population studies from non-defaunated sites. And here, this matrix data is in the form that you see below, where you have transitions between the different stages and survival within those different stages. So these seeds, seedlings, juveniles, and adults. All of this vital rate data, all of this population data I found for these 47 species. Then using these population models and the parameters that I talked about before, then I created new population matrices. So first, I created a baseline scenario where I took the population matrix that I showed before, this one here, but then I split it into a undispersed and a dispersed seed and seedling category. And also, for seedlings, I made density-dependent mortality. And this is because seedlings, from the literature we know, are the most strongly density-dependent stage. So from that baseline scenario, then I created a defaunation scenario where I took the same matrix and altered it in 3 key ways. So first, I changed the probability of dispersal only if the trees were known to be large vertebrate dispersed, which we checked from the literature. Second, I added a trampling effect to alter seedling survival. And third, I added a seed predation effect to change seed survival. And the values here were drawn from the parameters that I showed earlier, from those meta-analyses of field data. So now that I had a defaunation scenario and a baseline scenario, I simulated the population dynamics and see over time, how does the baseline population do? How does the defaunation population do? And I can compare them to get what I'm calling a defaunation response, to see exactly how much defaunation mattered. How much did defaunation differ from what we would expect if there weren't defaunation effects? So the model that I designed, as I said, I have these parameter values from literature searches that I would draw from, take species demography, use those to build a baseline and a defaunation population matrix, simulate the populations over time, and then calculate how much defaunation affected that species given those set of parameters. Then I repeated this for each of my 47 species and 10,000 iterations to get all possible combinations of the species with their different life histories and different combinations of parameters to kind of explore the known possible defaunation scenarios based on what we have observed from other studies. Then, given all of this, all of these combinations, all of this running of the model, what predicted defaunation response the best? What is kind of driving changes in the population? And what I found was that seed predation mattered more than anything else. More than trampling, more than dispersal, more than vital rates, seed predation was really driving effects of defaunation. So for example, in this graph here, we can see on the x-axis change in seed predation. If it's less than 1, that means that defaunation decreased seed predation. If it's greater than 1, that means that defaunation increased seed predation. On the y-axis, we can see that if it's less than 1, that defaunation decreased the population. Greater than 1, defaunation increased the population. So we see on the left side, when seed predation goes down, populations benefit. When seed predation goes up, populations suffer. But it's a little bit more complicated than this because it also depends on the adult survival. So with long-lived adults, species that have high adult survival, what we see is across this range of seed predation values and across all of the different model parameter configurations, values tend to stick close to 1. That is, defaunation did not really affect these long-lived adult, high adult survival species. But if we look at species with low adult survival, they were much more influenced by what was happening at the seed stage with really strong effects driven by changes in seed predation, really benefiting when seed predation decreased, really hurting when seed predation increased. Now, what does this all mean? First of all, seed predation can drive defaunation response. This is important to know because seed predation has often been overlooked in favor of thinking of seed dispersal. And demography also matters. So we saw in the previous slide that depending on the adult survival, trees were more or less influenced by what was happening due to these changed plant-animal interactions. However, there's still too much uncertainty around seed predation for us to make specific predictions. We saw the wide range of possible seed predation effects, from huge increase in seed predation to huge decrease in seed predation. So we really need to know, when does defaunation increase and when does it decrease? For example, how does this change across sites that might have different communities of seed predators? Or how does it change across species, where you might have different species traits that could mediate what will happen under defaunation? And there's one more question that I want to ask about the uncertainty around seed predation effects. And that is, does less seed predation actually mean lower seed mortality? So we see here, this is a graph that I showed earlier, that on the left side, when seed predation goes down, populations were really benefiting. But is that actually biologically likely? In our model, if seed predation went down, we assume that seed mortality went up. But that is thinking just about these large vertebrates. But there are other things that eat seeds besides large vertebrates. So there are also rodents and insects and fungi. And so when we remove the large vertebrates, then what happens to the seeds? Because we still have these other things that could kill seeds. Is it possible that these other seed enemies are compensating and killing the seeds when the large vertebrates aren't there to do it themselves? So I wanted to know, do other seed enemies compensate for reduced vertebrate seed predation? And to study this, I carried out an experiment in Sabah, Malaysian Borneo, with the help of my PhD advisor, Jedediah Brodie, and a collaborator, Matthew Luskin at University of Queensland. And for this experiment, we created a set of nested exclosures. So we had seeds that were accessible to all organisms. We had seeds that were inside large vertebrate exclosures, so keeping out the large animals to simulate defaunation. We had seeds that were kept inside rodent-proof cages. And then we also, inside of those cages, sprayed some with insecticide, some with fungicide, some with both. And then in all of our treatments, we recorded how many seeds were killed by vertebrates. So here we can see a seed that was chewed up by a vertebrate. And how many seeds in our various treatments survived to the seedling stage. So here we see some seedlings that are unfurling their cotyledons. We did this experiment with 5 species, one on the left in Saphendaceae, and then 4 dipterocarp species. For our results then, what do we find across these different treatments? Well, first, in the treatment that was accessible to all organisms, we found that large vertebrates did kill quite a lot of seeds. However, when we excluded those large vertebrates, vertebrate predation went down, but seedling survival stayed the same. So even though larger vertebrates weren't killing seeds, something else was. Insects and fungi were killing those seeds. And we know that insects and fungi were killing the seeds because in our insecticide and fungicide treatments, we found that insecticide and fungicide did have effects. So insects and fungi were killing the seeds even when the large animals weren't around, and they were compensating that disparity so that overall mortality was the same. So this is important because not only do we see a lack of reduced mortality, but also we're seeing the shift from vertebrate mortality to non-vertebrate mortality. And this is important for thinking about Jansen-Connell effects. So earlier I showed this picture where I said that probability of survival increased as you get away from the tree. The reason why it increases as you get away from a tree is because of mortality from insects and fungi. Insects and fungi are host specific and they're dispersal limited. So unlike vertebrates that roam around the entire forest and eat many species, they have a much stronger effect on distance and density dependence. So even if seed mortality stays the same, if we're shifting from vertebrates to non-vertebrates, the ones killing the seeds, that could have consequences down the line for these Jansen-Connell effects. But there's still a lot left to be studied about how exactly this plays out. So now, given everything that I've been talking about, what can we say about what defaunation means for forests? Well, first, I just want to point out that there's still huge uncertainty around defaunation impacts. And so it's still, I think, too early to make specific predictions about what will happen. And a large reason for that is because there's all this uncertainty around seed predation. We know from our model that seed predation can have really strong effects on tree populations, but we don't know enough about the magnitude or direction of those changes in seed predation to really be able to make accurate predictions. From our experiment, we see that reduced seed predation would likely be compensated. So the graph I showed earlier, on the left side with the decreased seed predation, increased population, that might not actually be the case. However, the other side, with the increased seed predation, decreased populations, that could still matter a lot. And then lastly, changes in seed predation from vertebrate caused mortality to non-vertebrate caused mortality could alter Jansen-Connell effects in a really important way, but we still need to do a lot more research to figure out how this change in the identity of the seed predator affects tree populations down the line. Overall, I want you to come away from this video understanding that we need to know more about seed predation. There's been more work done on seed dispersal. There's a much clearer story of how seed dispersal works. Seed predation is messy. There are various ways it could go. There are many organisms involved, but I think it's really important to understand what is going on with seed predation and how human impacts, especially overhunting, are altering the processes that are come together through seed predation to affect tropical trees. So with that, I would like to thank my collaborators, my committee members, my lab members, my hardworking fieldwork RAs, and everyone else that has supported me through these projects. Thank you.